Poverty in the UK is exploding in ways few dare to talk about. Behind closed doors, families are skipping meals to pay rent. Children arrive at school hungry, and working adults are trapped in debt despite holding full-time jobs. Energy bills rival mortgages, food banks overflow, and once secure communities now face homelessness and despair. This is not a distant problem. It is unfolding in towns, cities, and villages across the country right now. What if the real crisis is not the headlines we see, but the silent suffering we don't? Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind Britain's hidden collapse. Number 10. Immigration and economic pressures. Immigration has long been a defining feature of the UK, enriching its culture and economy, but in recent years, it has also become entangled with the country's poverty crisis. Many migrants arrive seeking work, often accepting jobs that are low-paid, insecure, and physically demanding. While these roles keep essential sectors like agriculture, care, and hospitality functioning, the workers themselves are often left vulnerable, living in overcrowded housing and sending much of their wages abroad to support families. At the same time, some communities feel growing strain as local resources from schools to healthcare are stretched thin, sparking resentment and fueling political tensions. These pressures create an environment where both migrants and local residents struggle side by side in systems that fail to protect them. The competition for affordable housing and low-skilled jobs has intensified, particularly in towns already dealing with high unemployment. Migrants may become scapegoats for wider economic failings, but the truth is that poverty stems from structural weaknesses, stagnant wages, poor housing policy, and cuts to social services. When resources are already scarce, the arrival of new workers highlights just how fragile these systems have become. Rather than addressing the root causes, governments often focus on stricter immigration controls, which do little to ease the underlying issues of inequality and insecurity. This approach risks deepening divisions while leaving both migrants and long-term residents without real solutions. Economic pressures linked to immigration also reveal the complexity of the UK's position in a globalised world. Migrants are essential to filling labour shortages, especially in healthcare and seasonal industries, yet they remain among the most exploited groups, often earning below the minimum wage or facing dangerous conditions. For native-born workers, frustration grows as they see public services stretched thinner and housing demands skyrocketing. Unless broader reforms tackle the housing crisis, underfunded welfare systems, and the imbalance of low-wage work, these pressures will continue to feed poverty across the country. Immigration itself is not the root cause of the poverty explosion, but without systemic changes, it will remain a flashpoint in the wider economic struggle, leaving millions caught in a cycle of hardship and division. Number 9. Healthcare gaps. Healthcare, once considered a cornerstone of equality in the UK, has become another factor deepening poverty. The National Health Service, though still vital, faces overwhelming pressure from underfunding, staff shortages, and rising demand. Waiting lists for basic treatments and specialist care stretch into months or even years, leaving many in pain or unable to work during the delay. For poorer households, private healthcare is simply not an option, and this unequal access creates a gap where the wealthier can buy quicker treatment while the vulnerable must endure suffering. Dental care has become especially problematic, with patients travelling long distances or turning to emergency services because they cannot afford routine appointments. These gaps in access not only harm physical health, but also push families further into poverty, as untreated conditions reduce their ability to work or care for loved ones. The strain on mental health services is equally severe. Economic stress, job insecurity, and the rising cost of living have triggered a surge in anxiety and depression. Yet counselling or therapy remains difficult to obtain through the NHS. Long waiting times and limited resources force many to cope alone, with conditions worsening until they become crises. For families already struggling financially, the lack of affordable mental health care compounds hardship, trapping people in cycles where poor health and poverty reinforce one another. Children too suffer under this strain, with untreated mental health issues affecting their performance at school and limiting their future prospects. The gap between what is needed and what is available grows wider each year, leaving vulnerable communities behind. These healthcare gaps act as hidden costs of poverty, silently draining energy, productivity, and hope. A minor illness or injury can escalate into a life-changing event when treatment is delayed or unaffordable. Communities with the highest poverty rates often face the worst health outcomes, creating an entrenched pattern of disadvantage. Without urgent investment in the NHS and targeted efforts to reduce disparities, healthcare will no longer serve as the great equalizer it was meant to be. Instead, it will deepen the divide, ensuring that poverty is not only about money, but also about who gets to live a healthy and dignified life. Number 8. Regional inequality. The poverty explosion in the UK cannot be fully understood without examining the stark divide between regions. While areas like London and the South East continue to attract investment, jobs, and higher wages, other parts of the country, particularly Northern England, Wales, and parts of Scotland, face entrenched deprivation. Former industrial towns, once powered by coal, steel, or shipbuilding, now struggle with long-term unemployment and declining local economies. The lack of well-paid, secure work has left entire communities dependent on low-wage service jobs, zero-hour contracts, or part-time work that offers little chance of financial stability. This uneven spread of opportunity has created a map of inequality, where you are born often determines the quality of life you can expect. This imbalance extends beyond employment into education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Children in poorer regions are more likely to attend underfunded schools, limiting their chances to compete with peers from wealthier areas. Access to healthcare can also vary, with shortages of GPs and mental health services more pronounced outside major cities. Public transport links are weaker in rural and post-industrial areas, isolating people from job markets and opportunities. These differences accumulate over generations, ensuring that poverty is not just an individual struggle, but a regional inheritance. Residents of disadvantaged areas often feel overlooked and abandoned, fueling frustration and distrust in national institutions. The persistence of regional inequality threatens the very fabric of the youth. By concentrating wealth and opportunity in certain areas while neglecting others, the country widens its internal divides and undermines the promise of equal opportunity. Efforts such as levelling up initiatives have been announced with fanfare, but progress has been slow and inconsistent, leaving many skeptical of real change. Without sustained investment in jobs, education, and public services in poorer regions, poverty will continue to deepen and spread. Addressing regional equality is not just about fairness, it is about ensuring that the nation as a whole can thrive, rather than leaving large parts of it trapped in cycles of decline. Number 7. Debt and credit traps. Debt has become an unavoidable reality for millions of households across the UK, with many families relying on credit just to meet everyday expenses. Rising rents, energy bills, and grocery costs leave little room in monthly budgets, forcing people to turn to credit cards, payday loans, or buy now pay later schemes to survive. What starts as a short-term solution often spirals into a long-term trap, as high interest rates quickly transform small debts into overwhelming burdens. For households already living paycheck to paycheck, even a missed payment can trigger fees, collection calls, and further financial instability. Instead of being a tool for flexibility, credit has become a weapon that deepens the cycle of poverty. The psychological toll of mounting debt is as severe as the financial strain. Many people describe a constant feeling of dread every time they open a letter or check their bank account. Parents worry about whether they can provide for their children, while juggling repayment schedules, while young adults entering the workforce already carry thousands in student loans before they even begin to build their lives. The stress of unmanageable debt often spills over into mental health struggles, with anxiety and depression becoming more common among those facing endless bills. This emotional burden adds another layer to poverty, making it harder to focus on work, education, or long-term goals. The growth of predatory lending has only worsened the crisis. Payday lenders and high-interest credit providers target the most vulnerable, offering quick access to cash, but at terms that almost guarantee financial ruin. Instead of addressing the root causes, low wages, high living costs, and inadequate safety nets, society has allowed credit to fill the gap, with devastating results. Without stricter regulation and more affordable financial options, debt will continue to act as quicksand, pulling people deeper the more they struggle to escape. Breaking free from these traps requires systemic change, not just individual resilience, and until that change comes, millions will remain chained to a cycle of borrowing and repayment they can never truly overcome. Number 6. Food bank dependence. The rise in food bank dependence across the UK has become one of the starkest symbols of the poverty explosion. Once considered an emergency resource for people facing sudden hardship, food banks have now become a routine lifeline for millions. Families with full-time jobs, pensioners, and even students are increasingly turning to these services because their wages or benefits no longer cover the basics. Shelves that were once stocked for emergencies are now emptied within hours, and volunteers report heartbreaking scenes of parents skipping meals so their children can eat. What was once a safety net is now the daily survival plan for countless households. This reliance on food banks exposes the depth of financial strain hitting ordinary families. Rising grocery prices have outpaced incomes, leaving many unable to afford staples like bread, milk, or fresh fruit. Stories of children going to bed hungry or workers arriving at shifts after eating nothing all day are becoming alarmingly common. Food insecurity is not just a matter of hunger, it erodes dignity and creates lasting psychological scars. People who once prided themselves on independence now face the stigma of relying on charity, while volunteers are stretched thin trying to meet demand that shows no sign of slowing down. The expansion of food bank usage is also a damning reflection of policy failures. Local charities were never meant to replace national systems of welfare, yet they have become the frontline defense against hunger. Donations often cannot keep up with demand, forcing rationing and limited distributions. As the cost of living crisis continues, the line between temporary hardship and permanent dependence blurs, trapping families in cycles of need. Without systemic reforms to wages, benefits, and food pricing, food banks will remain overwhelmed, and hunger will persist as a hidden epidemic across the UK. This dependence is not a reflection of individual failure, it is evidence of a society where the essentials of life are no longer guaranteed for millions. Number 5. Child poverty crisis. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the UK's poverty explosion is the scale of child poverty. Current estimates show that nearly 1 in 3 children now live in households that cannot consistently provide the essentials: nutritious food, warm clothing, or a stable home environment. This reality has long-term consequences that extend far beyond childhood, shaping health, education, and future opportunities. Teachers report children arriving at school hungry or without proper uniforms, while healthcare workers see rising cases of malnutrition and preventable illnesses. These are not isolated problems. They are systemic indicators of a society where children are growing up without the security every young person deserves. The impact is not just physical, but also psychological. Growing up in poverty affects self-esteem, social relationships, and emotional development. Many children feel excluded from activities that their peers take for granted, such as school trips, sports clubs, or even birthday celebrations. This sense of exclusion can fuel cycles of shame and low confidence that carry into adulthood. At the same time, parents already stretched to their limits often struggle with guilt and anxiety, knowing they cannot provide the same opportunities for their children as others can. Poverty thus becomes a burden shared across generations, trapping families in a cycle that is hard to break. Charities and community organizations have stepped in, offering free breakfasts in schools, clothing drives, and after-school care, but these efforts can only do so much. The scale of child poverty far outstrips what voluntary support can manage. Without decisive national policies, such as increased child benefits, affordable housing solutions, and better job security, millions of young people will continue to face disadvantages that limit their futures before they even begin. Allowing child poverty to persist is not only morally unacceptable, but also economically short-sighted, as it drains future potential from the country itself. Addressing this crisis is not about charity. It is about ensuring that every child has a fair chance to grow. Number 4. Energy price shock. The surge in energy prices has become one of the most visible and painful contributors to poverty in the UK. Gas and electricity bills have doubled for many households in just a few short years, leaving families scrambling to cover costs that were once manageable. What used to be a routine monthly bill has now turned into a looming threat, with many struggling to keep the lights on or heat their homes. This crisis has forced people into impossible choices, often described as heating or eating, where essential warmth during freezing winters competes directly with the need for daily meals. For pensioners and low-income families, the consequences are dire, as cold homes worsen health conditions and drive up hospital admissions. The impact of these soaring prices goes far beyond physical discomfort. Parents describe the humiliation of bundling their children in coats indoors because central heating is unaffordable. Communities are reporting unprecedented spikes in requests for emergency energy vouchers, while food banks also face increased demand as families divert grocery money to pay their energy bills. Small businesses, already operating on thin margins, are collapsing under the weight of inflated energy costs, leading to layoffs that further strain struggling households. These pressures spread like wildfire through local economies, ensuring that the pain of high energy prices reaches far beyond individual homes. Experts warn that the energy price shock is not a short-term crisis, but a structural failure that could entrench poverty for years. Global fuel shortages, unstable supply chains, and domestic policy decisions all combine to create conditions where relief feels far away. Households without insulation or energy-efficient systems are hit the hardest. Yet retrofitting remains far too expensive for those already struggling. This creates a cruel paradox. Those most in need of energy savings are the least able to afford the solutions. As long as energy remains unaffordable, poverty in the UK will continue to deepen, and the most vulnerable will pay the highest price in both health and dignity. Number 3. Cuts to social safety nets. Across the UK, one of the most devastating drivers of poverty has been the steady erosion of social safety nets. Universal credit, housing benefits, and disability support were once designed to act as a lifeline for those facing difficult times. Yet year after year, these systems have been reshaped, reduced or delayed, leaving vulnerable people to face crises with little to no protection. Families who rely on benefits to supplement low wages are seeing payments that barely cover essentials, while delays in processing claims push many into debt before help even arrives. For disabled individuals, stricter assessments often strip away critical support, forcing them to navigate life without the resources they need to survive. The consequences ripple outward into every corner of society. Charities and local councils are left to pick up the pieces, but their resources are limited and often overstretched. Parents dependent on child benefits find themselves unable to provide nutritious meals or school supplies, while older citizens struggle to afford heating during the winter. Mental health services are overwhelmed as more people fall into despair, realizing that the safety nets they once trusted to catch them no longer exist. The withdrawal of state support doesn't just increase hardship, it normalizes it, creating a climate where poverty is no longer viewed as an emergency but as an accepted reality of life for millions. These cuts deepen inequality and widen the gap between the most vulnerable and those who are financially secure. When government safety nets shrink, private solutions like food banks and charity aid become the default, but these are patchwork fixes rather than lasting solutions. The erosion of public support systems shifts responsibility from the state, individuals, and communities, placing the heaviest burden on those least able to carry it. This silent dismantling of welfare has accelerated the poverty explosion, turning temporary struggles into long-term trauma. Without strong and reliable safety nets, families cannot plan for the future. Children grow up disadvantaged, and poverty becomes an inherited condition rather than a temporary setback. Number 2. Stagnant wages versus inflation. For decades, wages in the United Kingdom have failed to keep pace with the rising cost of living. While official figures may show occasional small increases, these gains quickly evaporate when compared against the relentless surge of food prices, transportation costs, and utility bills. Workers earning the same jobs their parents once held find their paychecks stretched to the breaking point. Even professions traditionally seen as stable, teachers, nurses, and public service employees, are reporting that their income no longer provides the security it once did. The reality is stark. Having a full-time job is no longer a guaranteed shield against poverty, and the very idea of the working poor has become a painful truth for millions. Inflation has magnified this crisis to unbearable levels. Essentials like bread, milk, and vegetables have risen in price far faster than wages, meaning everyday shopping trips eat into household budgets with alarming speed. Transport fares have climbed, further shrinking disposable income. Families that once managed to save even a small amount each month now find themselves living paycheck to paycheck, constantly choosing which bills to prioritize and which to delay. For many, credit cards or short-term loans fill the gap. But this only deepens the cycle of debt. The gap between stagnant wages and skyrocketing living costs has turned ordinary households into financial battlegrounds, where survival requires endless calculation and sacrifice. This wage stagnation does more than drain bank accounts. It corrodes hope and ambition. Young workers see little point in climbing career ladders that offer minimal pay increases compared to rising expenses. Experienced employees, loyal to their industries for years, feel undervalued as their wages barely shift, while executive bonuses soar. The psychological toll of always falling behind cannot be overstated. People are working harder and longer yet still feel poorer each year. Without decisive action to raise wages in line with inflation, poverty will not just remain. It will deepen. The longer this imbalance persists, the more the United Kingdom risks embedding a permanent underclass of workers, condemned to struggle, despite doing everything society asks of them. Number 1. Soaring housing costs. Across the United Kingdom, the price of simply keeping a roof overhead has become unbearable for millions of households. Renters face some of the steepest increases in decades, with average monthly payments climbing at a pace that outstrips wage growth by a wide margin. Young families are particularly squeezed, often handing over nearly half of their income to landlords. Those who once dreamed of buying a home are watching property prices drift further out of reach, creating an entire generation locked into lifelong renting. Even those who managed to secure mortgages are not safe, as rising interest rates have pushed repayments to levels that feel unsustainable, especially for middle-income earners who never expected to struggle this much. This housing crisis is not only about numbers on a spreadsheet, it has reshaped daily life. Parents report skipping meals so they can pay rent and keep their children sheltered. Communities that once thrived are now marked by transience, as families are forced to move repeatedly due to sudden rent hikes. Homelessness has surged, not just among individuals facing extreme hardship, but also among working families who simply cannot meet the demands of landlords and lenders. Temporary shelters are overflowing, while councils struggle to provide affordable options. The dignity of secure housing, once seen as a given in one of the world's wealthiest nations, now feels like a privilege reserved for the few. Economists warn that the UK's soaring housing costs are creating a dangerous domino effect that fuels poverty across every other sector of life. When half of a household's income disappears into rent or mortgage payments, there is less for food, healthcare, education, and saving. This lack of financial breathing room means even small setbacks, a car breakdown, a medical bill, or a missed paycheck, can trigger crisis. The housing market, designed as a source of stability and growth, has instead become a relentless engine of inequality. Until housing becomes accessible and affordable again, poverty will continue to spread like wildfire, trapping millions of ordinary families in a cycle they cannot escape. The poverty crisis sweeping across the UK is more than just statistics. It is the daily reality of millions of people, from soaring housing costs and stagnant wages to the collapse of safety nets and unaffordable energy bills. Each factor feeds into the next, creating a web of hardship that is nearly impossible to escape. Families who once felt secure now find themselves on the edge, forced into impossible choices between food, rent, and heating. Children grow up in hunger, workers fall into debt traps, and healthcare gaps leave the most vulnerable without the support they desperately need. What makes this crisis even more alarming is how silent it often remains. The struggles of parents juggling bills, pensioners shivering through winters, or migrants working long hours for low pay rarely dominate the news cycle. Yet these stories reveal the human cost of policy failures and economic neglect. Poverty is not just about lacking money, it is about losing dignity, hope, and opportunity. Unless the UK confronts these realities with bold reforms, the poverty explosion will not slow down. It will deepen, spreading its impact across generations and reshaping society in ways that none of us can afford to ignore.